And it goes a little something like...
Introduction. Before Christianity and Islam spread in Ethiopia, the people had indigenous religious beliefs and practices. Christianity in Ethiopia is traditionally believed to have started in the 4th century. The religion slowly grew across the western part of modern-day Ethiopia. Centuries later, Islam would grow in the east and Harar developed as an urban Islamic city center in the 16th century. Today, Harar bears the title Medinat al-Awliya, or City of Saints. Harar's unique, long, and rich history as both an African and Islamic city has led to its recognition as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. However, what is not well known is the existence and contributions of Christians and other non-Muslims in Harar, particularly before the 1887 incorporation into the Ethiopian Empire. This video aims to shed light onto the long history of non-Muslim communities in and around Harar in an effort to challenge the misconception that Harar is a city of only Islamic origins. As will be apparent by this video, the land in which Harar sits was always home to people who held diverse religious beliefs. Independent Harla Kingdom, 6th to 13th century, society and culture. The independent Harla Kingdom existed from the 6th century, if not earlier, and lasted until the 13th century. The first documented inhabitants of the area around Harar are the Harla people. Through archaeological evidence, the Harla people can be traced to the 6th century. This is over 100 years before the advent of Islam, so it is certain that these people were not Muslim when they settled. The Harla people lived in a settlement with the same name, which is situated 40 kilometers northwest of the modern-day city of Harar. The Harla Kingdom occupied a large geographical area that included parts of modern-day Ethiopia, Djibouti, Somaliland, and the port city of Zaila. The indigenous Harla people may have been Cushitic in origin and related to Oromo and Somali peoples. The Harla developed highly advanced civilizations. They developed and used pottery for various functions. They developed their own coins, calendar, and stamps used to imprint symbols. They mined gold and silver from a mountain within their territory. They were well known for their agriculture and pastoral knowledge, skills, and techniques. Notably, they were rich in cattle. They also developed wells to harvest water for human and animal consumption and for watering crops. Archaeological evidence has uncovered the Harla people traded with civilizations from the Middle East, India, and China. For example, Chinese coins from Renjong's Song dynasty in the 11th century were found in Harla, as well as coins with Arabic seals. Trading with people from faraway lands demonstrates the Harla's advanced social, communication, and business skills. While the Harla worked hard to earn their wealth, they also enjoyed leisure activities such as the ancient board game Mancala. The non-Muslim population, followers of indigenous beliefs and Christians. The first people who inhabited Harla and surrounding settlements followed indigenous beliefs and Christianity. For example, the Harla people are believed to have practiced an indigenous belief system. Harari people today are descendants of not only the Harla, but other groups as well. These people likely held diverse pre-Islamic spiritual beliefs and practices, some of which are still apparent in Harari cultural practices today. Further, excavations in Harla have uncovered remains of Suids, wild boar, and bush pig, which suggest either non-Muslim populations or non-observance of Islamic dietary laws. Within the Harla Kingdom, the city of Zaila was described in multiple Arabic sources from the 10th to 12th centuries as a Christian city with Yemeni Christians living there as the majority, and a minority of Yemeni Muslim merchants. In the 10th and 11th centuries, the city was under the control of the Ethiopian Christian kingdom. In the mid-13th century, Ibn Sa'd al-Maghribi describes the people who lived in Harla were well known and had a high reputation among the mostly Christian Habesha. He does not mention the religion of the people. The presence of Christians in 4th century Somaliland is apparent through the discovery of a burial with a stele that bears an Orthodox cross. There are also 13th century Christian burials that were discovered in Somaliland. While the area today is predominantly Muslim, a peculiar tradition of the Somali people in that region is to paint a cross on their foreheads during the annual celebration of their Saint Abarkadle. This is perhaps a lingering tradition from when Christianity was practiced in the region. The Islamization and the fall of the Harla Kingdom started with foreign Muslim settlers and local Muslim converts. Both the Sultanate of Shewa and the Ifat Sultanate were established and developed within pagan Harla territories. The Sultanate of Shewa describes the earliest communities of settled Muslims in eastern Ethiopia. It was made up of Muslims who settled in the region and operated as independent states and trading communities. Muslim traders settled in villages along trade routes to Zayla from the 10th century. In the mid-10th century, Al-Masudi reported that Muslim families in Ethiopia were living under the rule of the indigenous pagan rulers. It appears that the Sultanate of Shewa existed as an organized Muslim state in the 12th to 13th centuries. This is supported by archaeological evidence of a mosque and Muslim burials within Harla by the 12th century. The Shewa region was under the rule of local pagan rulers until at least the 13th century. While from the 10th to 12th centuries, Zayla is described as a Christian city with a Yemeni Christian majority. By the early 13th century, Zayla was described by geographers and chroniclers such as Yaqut, Ibn Sa'd, and Abul Fida as a Muslim city governed by local sheikhs. The inhabitants of the city were now predominantly Somali and Muslim. It wasn't until 1415 when Yakuno Amlak, Ethiopia's Christian king, reconquered Zayla. Despite people around modern-day Harar possibly starting to convert to Islam in the 9th century at the earliest, the Islamization process was gradual. Also, it is doubtful if Islam initially spread beyond the ruling class. The first Muslims were the rich and not the peasant majority. Additionally, it has been suggested that the Islamization of people that occurred during the 12th to 13th centuries was superficial, and that the people were only nominally Muslim by name. The people retained their indigenous beliefs and practices. Archaeological evidence of the Harla people's pre-Islamic indigenous funerary practices dates to the 13th or 14th centuries. This demonstrates how the people may not have fully converted to Islam by this time. An important note is that people in the Horn of Africa did not always view religious practices as of strictly only Christian, Muslim, or indigenous affiliation. Rather, they lived in congruence with a regional culture and deep cultural values. When religion is practiced like this, a person can hold beliefs and practices from multiple religions without issue. An example of this is found in the Ethiopian festival of Abo at Mount Sequala, which is dedicated to the Christian saint Chebera Menfes Chidus. During this event, the people sing songs with frequent mentions of Allah, Abadir, and other Islamic saints. Issues only arise when other people, such as political leaders, define religious deviance and punish those whose behaviors lie outside of what is deemed acceptable. In the 13th century, Muslims in Zala and Berbera began to proselytize Islam to the non-Muslims in the Harari region. In 1430, there was a large-scale conversion of people in the Harari region by Sheikh Ibrahim Abu Zaharbui. This demonstrates how as late as the 15th century there was still a significant non-Muslim population living around Harar. The Harla people had a custom of exogamy, which is the encouragement of marrying outside their group. By marrying into Muslim families, the Harla people slowly became a part of the growing Muslim sultanates in the area. It is important to note that the Harla people were tolerant of people of different faiths. They allowed the Muslims to settle on their native land, establish homes, mosques, and even their own governments for centuries. There is no record of the Harla people subjecting Muslims to religious persecution. To the contrary, because the Harla practiced exogamy, over time, many Harla converted to Islam. It appears that under Harla rule the Muslims were treated well, and they lived together in peace. The growing Muslim sultanates eventually grew to the point where they were larger and stronger than the Harla kingdom. In 1288, the Muslim Ifat Sultanate raided Habut, which is believed to have been the capital city of Harla. To remain at peace, the Harla kingdom agreed to start paying tribute to the larger Sultanate of Ifat. The Harla people as a distinct civilization collapsed in the 16th century. This may in part be due to the Harla assimilating into other communities within Harar and elsewhere. Also, after the jihad of the 16th century, most of the Harla people left Harar. Non-Muslims living under Islamic rule, 13th to 19th century. Resistance to convert to Islam or Christianity. In Ethiopia, there is a long history of the indigenous people wanting to maintain their local religions and refusing to convert to either Christianity or Islam. For centuries, people living in the land of modern-day Ethiopia worshipped various gods including Marum, Aster, Beher, Mater, Dino, Dask, and Wak. While Christianity is believed to be introduced to Ethiopia in the 4th century, the religion failed to spread due to resistance. Many people within the kingdom of Axum continued to worship their native gods for over 1,000 years after the introduction of Christianity. These followers of indigenous religions were persecuted in the 14th century by Amda Sayan and again in the 15th century by Zara Yaqub. The development of Christian scripture in Ethiopia during the 15th century was actively used to counteract the persistence of pagan practices. In a document that chronicles the history of the Sultanate of Shewa, the death of the local Queen Badit or Gudit is recalled in 1063. The pagan Ethiopian queen, also known as Banu al-Hamwiya, successfully defeated the Christian forces which allowed her people to maintain their way of life. An example of the refusal to convert to Islam is found in modern-day Somaliland. According to Somali legend, at around the 12th or 13th century, Sheikh Yusuf al-Qanin, al-Barkadle, converted Somali people from their indigenous religion to Islam. However, some people refused to convert. It is said that these people moved to the Harari region to maintain their indigenous religion. According to the legend, one of those people who moved to the Harari region was a woman named Hanfali. She was the wife of Muhammad Hanif, who was a pagan king who tried to defend the Somali people from Sheikh Yusuf al-Qanin's attempts of converting them to Islam. Hanfali is said to be buried in Harar. These non-Muslim people would have found safety in living amongst the other non-Muslims around Harar during this time. As mentioned previously, it would be at least another 200 years before a large-scale conversion in this area. There is an interesting connection between the people who refused to convert to Islam in the Somali legend and the Harari people. The people who refused to convert are said to have worn their hair in 2 bits. In Harari culture, women wear their hair bunched into 2 balls starting from when they are married in a wedding ceremony called Gufta Mogud. In the ceremony, they cover their hair with a thin fabric called a gufta. It is believed that this practice of covering one's hair with this fabric began as a cultural practice when the Harari converted to Islam. In 1856, Richard Burton recorded upper-class Harari women wearing their hair this way. Another example of resistance to Islam is the murder of an Argaba sheikh, Umar Salani, and dozens of his followers by pagan Itu Oromo people in the 1870s. There is even a recorded case of a European refusing to convert to Islam in Harar. A man recorded as Paleologos was possibly the first European to settle in Harar. In 1884, he was sent to jail by Amir Abdullahi because he refused to convert to Islam. When Menelik entered Harar in 1887, he was released. Paleologos had 4 children with his Oromo wife. One of his children, Marcos Paleologos, lived with the French traveler and author Henry de Montfray in Dawa in the early 1930s. The degree to which non-Muslims were free to practice their religion under Islamic rule varied through time and was influenced by politics. For example, when Islam arrived in Somaliland, the people were allowed to practice their religion and their lives changed very little. However, they had to pay the jizya fee and accept the rule of the Muslims. The forced conversion and genocide of non-Muslims in Ethiopia. While some non-Muslims were able to resist conversion, others were forced to convert. In the 14th century, the Christian emperor Amda Sayan chronicles how subjects of his empire were captured by the neighboring Islamic empire and were forced to convert to Islam. In the 16th century, it is estimated that Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi's jihad against the Christian empire led to mass enslavement and forced conversion of 9 out of 10 Christians to Islam. The men raided and pillaged multiple villages through the empire, leaving destruction and death, stealing whatever they could, and enslaving women and children. Imam Ahmad himself captured and enslaved 2 Christian women and made them his sex slaves, concubines. One was named Hajra and the other was a relative of Emperor Lebna Dengel. Any non-Muslim who encountered Imam Ahmad's army was given 2 or 3 options. They could either convert to Islam, be killed, or pay the jizya, which was an extortion tax meant to humiliate, if they were offered this third option at all. This degrading treatment is sanctioned in the Quran and Tafsir, where it says the payment of jizya is a sign of kufar. non-belief, and disgrace. Thus the dhimmi, which are a specific group of non-Muslims, must be continuously reminded of their lower status compared to Muslims. Imam Ahmad's religiously motivated war followed in the footsteps of his father-in-law, Amir Mahfouz. Mahfouz carried out numerous offensive raids every year against the Ethiopian Empire, especially during Lent. These religious zealots wanted to turn the Christian Ethiopian Empire into an Islamic state by forcing them to convert to Islam. It is important to highlight that a wide spectrum of Muslim groups existed in Ethiopia during this time. There were those who were religious zealots and those who were still somewhat connected to their indigenous religion. Imam Ahmad mobilized other zealots to join his army and fight. This radical group initially grew under the leadership of his uncle, Garad Aboin, in 1520. Non-Muslim Harla and other non-Muslims had to decide if they wanted to flee to freely practice their religion, stay and convert to Islam, or pay to live in their own homes. Of course, a decision to convert to a religion made under duress would likely not be sincere. In a desperate effort to preserve one's life and property, a false conversion may seem like the right decision. In fact, as will be discussed later, there is a well-documented phenomenon where people around the world have lived double lives professing one religion publicly while believing in another privately. After the Muslims lost the Ethiopian Adal War in 1543, they invaded the Ethiopian highlands again in 1572, and then again in 1577. The final invasion under Muhammad Gassa was unsuccessful as Ethiopian Emperor Sarsa Dengel was able to repulse them back to Harar. After this failure, the Harari people stopped trying to spread Islam in Ethiopia by conquering their land and instead focused on peaceful proselytizing. Slave and free people. According to Sharia law, Muslims can only enslave non-Muslims. Thus, Muslims who obeyed this teaching would look for only non-Muslims to enslave or purchase. As the Islamic sultanates grew, non-Muslims became increasingly at risk of being enslaved. More Muslims led to more slave raids, and more non-Muslims were being enslaved, sold and shipped abroad. This is apparent by Aden port records, where it is documented that an increase in Ethiopian slaves were being imported to Yemen between the 13th and 15th centuries. In the 15th century, the Sultan of Adal, Jamal ad-Din II, is said to have flooded Middle Eastern markets, India, Greece, and Persia, with Abyssinian slaves. In the late 15th and 16th centuries, Amir Mahfouz led slave-raiding campaigns and likely sent most to merchants and some to the ruler of Yemen. The enslavement and sale of non-Muslims in Ethiopia in the 15th and 16th centuries made the port of Zayla on the Somali coast the largest market for slaves in the Horn of Africa. Most of the slaves who were sent abroad suffered immensely. They were subjected to physical abuse and poor environmental conditions that led to the development of diseases. The Arab slave trade had a high death rate. It is estimated that for every one person who was enslaved, 10 people were killed. In the 19th century, slaves were one of the main exports out of Harar. The scale of slavery in Harar caused Richard Burton to declare the city the great halfway house of slaves that came from Janjaro, Gurage, and Oromo territories. However, despite these hardships, one boy from the Harari region was able to rise above these circumstances. His name is believed to have been Shapu, and he may have been ethnically Oromo. In the 16th century, he was sent abroad as a child slave and grew to become a king in India. According to Richard Burton, in the 19th century, the worst slaves were kept in Harar for domestic purposes, and the best were exported to the Arabs. During the 13-year jihad in the 16th century, hundreds if not thousands of freeborn non-Muslims were enslaved and taken to Harar. In one slave raid, 500 non-Muslim women and children, livestock and mules were stolen from the Christian Empire and given to people in Harar. Poor people and new converts were given these human beings and items as zakat, charity. Some of the jizya fee collected from the non-Muslims was also sent back to Harar and distributed as zakat. While in Harar, these non-Muslims were an important part of the Harari society. Women would have held various domestic responsibilities, which could include cooking, cleaning, taking care of children, livestock, and farming. Ethiopian male slaves outside of Ethiopia were trained as bodyguards and worked in their slave master's business. This could have been how they were utilized in Harar as well. Non-Muslim slaves in Harar could even become part of Harari families. If a Harari man freed a slave, he could then take her as a wife. If the freed slave is taken as a wife and she has a child, the child is called Gar Walad. If the wife who was previously a slave was taken to Harar from another area, she could now learn the ways of the city and become accepted as socially Harari. Her children would be considered Harari as it is the ethnic origin of their father. An example of this is how Imam Ahmad's non-Muslim sex slaves gave birth to 2 sons. They would be considered Harari even though their mothers were Abyssinian Christians. Non-Muslim slaves who were freed could also be integrated into the Harari community. Therefore, non-Muslims were important in Harar because they supported the well-functioning of Harar's households and economy. They even became the ancestors of the Muslim Harari people through childbirth from non-Muslim slaves. Slavery in Harar was first abolished in 1875 during the Egyptian occupation. This greatly reduced the practice. However, the practice continued, and it wasn't until 1942 when Emperor Haile Selassie abolished slavery in Ethiopia, which Harar was now a part of. Harar became home to not only non-Muslim slaves, but also new converts. In the 1550s, tens of thousands of refugees, many of them new converts, settled into Harar from the Harar-Kshetra Plateau. They were escaping from battles between their people and Gelawdewos's Christian empire. These people represented a significant and influential part of the population. For one, they were able to introduce new customs. While these refugees claimed they converted to Islam, they were indifferent to following Islamic law. A famous example of a Muslim convert in Harar during this time was Amir Uthman. He was a freed non-Muslim Abyssinian slave who was either captured or bought within the Christian Ethiopian Empire. He worked in politics under Emir Nur for many years and was then chosen to be the Sultanate's next leader in 1567. Like other new converts, he too was indifferent to obeying Sharia law. He permitted wine drinking and was said to have neglected his religious obligations. He opened the city's markets to the non-Muslim Oromo people for the first time and signed a peace treaty with them. His government was overthrown because of an incident where he refused to obey Sharia law and instead chose to respect the conditions of the treaty he negotiated. Amir Uthman's son, grandson, and great-grandson all became emirs of Harar. The Harla people may too have been indifferent to Sharia law. According to local folklore from the Harla village near Daridawa, the Harla refused to fast during Ramadan and attempted to have the Quran written in the Harla language. The folklore attributes these acts of disobedience to Allah to the Harla people's extinction, enforcement of Islamic beliefs and practices. In 1525, an intense civil war broke out in Harar because of fundamentalist Muslims' refusal to tolerate practices they deemed to be un-Islamic. The war was between the armies of Sultan Abu Bakr and Imam Ahmed in response to Abu Bakr's relaxed secular laws that allowed un-Islamic activities in Harar. Quran teachers and sheikhs rebuked Abu Bakr for his conduct. Abu Bakr and his army were not practicing Islam and were doing what was haram, forbidden. While there was a segment of Harar's population that learned Islam and were strict followers, the populations of nominal Muslims, new converts, and non-Muslim slaves in Harar meant many residents did not have a strong understanding of Islam in the 16th century. One cannot expect a convert to Islam to abandon their former religion immediately, particularly when conversion did not follow a process of indoctrination, but was accepted under duress or for material advantage. Even Imam Ahmad understood this during the Ethiopian Adal War and made sure to station his soldiers with the converted villages so that they don't continue their non-Islamic religious practices and leave Islam. Despite this, many people did leave Islam during the war, some of whom appear to be Imam Ahmad's soldiers. Instrumental to teaching Islam was the Kitab al-Fara'id. This book is believed to have been written in the 17th century or possibly the late 16th century. The book functions as a basic guide to Islam. It is written in both Arabic and the local language at the time, Old Harari. It includes information about Islamic creed or Aqidah, beliefs and dogma. Harar started to become an urban center of scriptural Islamic learning. This strengthened the Muslim identity of its people. The consequence of not having access to Arabic scripture and learned scholars is seen in other Islamized areas of Ethiopia. In some areas without access to scripture, religious flexibility exists whereby the people may choose to convert from and to Islam for various reasons. Through the establishment of Islamic settings and social customs, the religious adherence of the Harari people was closely monitored and enforced. For example, at every mosque in Harar there is a prayer group that men could join. In these groups, the men are expected to go to the mosque and pray 5 times a day together. If someone is absent, his fellow group members would look for him. Similarly, if Harari children were absent from Quran Gay, Islamic classes, they would be forcibly brought back to the school, taunted and punished. Building these places of indoctrination was a conscious endeavor. It is said that the idea to establish Quran Gay was from a founding father and saint of Harar, Sofi Yahya. Just like mosques in Harar, Quran Gay is also highly accessible as there is at least one located in every neighborhood. This is how children in Harar could become indoctrinated with the ideology of Islam. They then grew up to become more religious than their nominal Muslim parents and older generations. While early Muslims in the area were motivated to convert to Islam for practical and material benefits, their indoctrinated descendants would soon not be aware of any other way to live. Therefore, through the development of mosques, schools, books, and social monitoring, there was immense pressure to adhere to Islam. Failure to do so would result in punishment. Crypto-Christians and crypto-pagans. There are many incentives that would influence someone in the Harari region to convert to Islam, aside from genuine conviction, gained from proselytization by religious preachers. These include the impact of trade, benefits gained from Arabic literacy and administration systems, enhanced power, prestige, warfare, and belonging to the larger Muslim community. The legal and social enforcement of Islamic beliefs and practices that developed in Harar in the 16th century resulted in a lack of religious freedom. In addition, Islam has an apostasy law where the punishment for leaving Islam is death. This meant anyone who presented as a Muslim, whether or not they truly believed, had to be mindful of their religious reputation. The mere suspicion that one had left Islam could place them at risk of execution. The execution of apostates was performed during the 16th century as it was ordered by Imam Ahmad during the Ethiopian Adal War. In societies where there is a lack of religious freedom and immense pressure to conform to the state religion, some people choose to hide their religious beliefs and practices. A non-Muslim could publicly present as a Muslim in an Islamic state to gain the social and material benefits that come with this label, while continuing to practice their religion privately. This phenomenon has occurred for centuries around the world where these social conditions exist. Many Christian communities around the world within the Ottoman Empire lived as secret crypto-Christians because of Islam's apostasy law. Crypto-Christians are people who profess a religion other than Christianity publicly, yet in private, they practice Christianity. For example, in Cyprus, crypto-Christians engaged in both Christian and Muslim practices. They gave their children a public Muslim name and secret Christian name. They were baptized and confirmed before a Muslim circumcision. They fasted during Ramadan and communion was administered. Marriages were according to Christian and Muslim rites. They visited mosques and churches, and they would give Christian consolations for deaths, but bury in Muslim cemeteries. Crypto-Christian communities are also well documented in Greece, Macedonia, Bulgaria, Albania, Kosovo, Iran, and Japan. Common reasons to convert to Islam was to avoid paying the jizya fee and to maintain their property and status. Examples of this phenomenon are also found in Ethiopia. In the 20th century, some Oromo people were crypto-pagans. They continued to practice wakafana in private while publicly declaring to be either Christian or Muslim. In the 15th century, the Christian Ethiopian Empire commanded people to stop their indigenous religious practices, but they resisted and continued to practice them in secret. In response to the disobedience, the church forced the people to tattoo Christian inscriptions on their foreheads. This practice still continues in the form of a cross in some areas. While some of these people may have been Christians who simply didn't want to abandon their traditional practices, it's possible that some were crypto-pagans. From these examples around the world, it is clear how crypto-Christians and crypto-pagans are forced into their way of life because of discriminatory laws and social hierarchies. The disintegration of these communities is thus facilitated by changes in laws. For example, when Islam's apostasy law was abolished as part of the Ottoman Imperial Reform Edict of 1856, some people came out publicly as Christians and appealed for official recognition. When Cyprus was annexed by the British, a small percentage publicly declared themselves as Christian. However, many stayed as crypto-Christians, possibly because of fear or shame. The social and political environment of Harar as a once forbidden city to non-Muslims would be conducive to develop crypto populations. In addition, because Islam was likely introduced by Sufi sheikhs in a way that merged with the local religious beliefs and practices, there could have been a transitional time where some people only outwardly accepted Islam. For example, the reverence of Muslim saints in Harar may have been a modification of traditional practices rooted in ancestral veneration or even polytheism. Before completely replacing the traditional religious figures with the Muslim saints, the people could have continued to venerate them in secret. However, to ascertain if and when crypto communities existed would be difficult due to the secretive nature of this phenomenon. If such communities did exist, they could have easily become absorbed into the Muslim population over time. This is what happened in Crete. The descendants of crypto-Christians gradually became believing Muslims and forgot all their Christian practices. However, some people did manage to preserve the crypto tradition to their descendants. Before the late 16th century movement to strengthen public adherence to Islam in Harar, many residents such as Sultan Abu Bakr, Emir Uthman the Abyssinian, and others openly disregarded Islamic law in favor of their own ways of life. Were these people simply presenting as Muslim for the social and material benefits while possibly concealing a devotion to another religion, or perhaps to none at all? Was Harar the home of long-forgotten crypto populations? The answer to these questions may become apparent in the future if further research is conducted in this area. Xenophobia of non-Muslims. After losing the Ethiopian Adal War that Imam Ahmad started, in the 1550s, Emir Nur built a wall around Harar to protect it from retaliation from the Ethiopian Empire and migrating Oromos. The wall was to prevent non-Muslims from entering, which were thought to be a threat. However, in 1567, when Emir Uthman allowed the Oromos to enter the Muslim markets after signing a peace treaty with them, the Oromo respected the treaty and did not fight against the Harari people. It was the Harari people who eventually broke the peace treaty. The Harari people have traditionally practiced strict endogamy and excluded outsiders. In doing so, they guard their high social status and also use their language as a secret tool of communication. To become recognized as Harari, one would have to assimilate by learning the language, religion, culture, and dress. The person would then be called Gay Lamud, which can be translated as one who learned the ways of the city. The Harari social hierarchy is captured in the concept of Taysiri. In the Harari language, this term translates to Black Mountain and refers to a place where there is no religion. This place is said to be filled with ignorance and incivility. Even in the 21st century, some Harari Muslims consider anywhere outside of Harar to be Taysiri. In contrast, the Harari people saw Harar as the opposite of Taysiri. They thought it was the place where the civilized and knowledgeable live. The xenophobia of the Harari people continued into the 19th century. In 1856, Richard Burton described the Harari people as xenophobic. He himself had to pretend to be a Muslim Arab to be allowed to enter Harar. The Harari ruler and people threatened free non-Muslims with death should they enter. The Harari people believed the prosperity of the city depended on the exclusion of non-Muslim travelers. The only non-Muslims who lived in the city were the slaves. Not only did the Harari people have an aversion to non-Muslims living amongst them, Richard Burton reported that they also disliked the Somali and Arab people who did live there. Over 100 years later, in 1975, the Harari people were similarly described as xenophobic by Sidney Waldron. By this time, the city was incorporated into the Ethiopian Empire and was home to thousands of people, both non-Muslim and Muslim. As one can imagine, the xenophobia towards foreigners intensified starting from 1875 when Harar was occupied by Egypt and the Harari people were forced to live alongside free non-Muslims for the first time. The Harari people were not the only people in the area who disliked non-Muslim foreigners. In 1880, Giuseppe Maria Giulietti, a man who had previously visited Harar, was murdered in 1881 on a journey he started from Assab. In August 1883, a man named Pietro Sacconi, who moved to Harar with his brother and started a business, was killed when he tried to lead a large caravan through Ogaden to Harar. The Harari resistance to the occupation contributed to its collapse in 1884. Contributions of non-Muslims to Harar 1875 to 1887. In 1875, Muhammad Rauf Pasha and his army of 1,200 men invaded Harar and occupied the land after killing Emir Muhammad Ali Abd al-Shakur. This was the first time in Harar's history that free non-Muslims settled in the city. Over the next few years, the number of soldiers increased to 3,400. In addition, 5,000 government officials, women and children also occupied Harar. Merchants started to move to the city as well. They were mostly from a Yemeni and Turkish background, but also about 20 non-Muslim Europeans. This included 11 Greek traders, 3 Italians, 3 French missionaries, and single Syrians and Indians. Over the years, Harar's prosperity attracted more European, Arab, and Indian businessmen to enter the city. During the occupation, it was reported by Austrian historian Philip Policzka that there were 3,000 Ethiopians, mostly Amhara, and 6,000 Oromo people living in Harar. Charles Gordon became Governor-General of Harar in February 1877. He visited Harar the following year. Living in a multicultural community gave the local people a glimpse into different ways of life, cultures, and languages. It gave them the opportunity to learn about other people's skills, knowledge, and worldviews. While some Harari people had hostile attitudes towards outsiders from their upbringing, those who did interact with the foreigners had much to benefit. The Egyptian occupation opened up the city to foreign trade for the first time. In 1880, the French merchant, Alfred Bardi, opened possibly the first European store in Harar. The same year, a Greek man named Manjola Klabutaki obtained land near Harar and cultivated coffee and fruits. At the time, he was the only provincial watchmaker in Ethiopia. 2 brothers, Pietro and Gaetano Sacconi, and 2 of their nephews started a business in Harar in 1882. 4 traders from Greece arrived in 1883. Their names were Johnny, Lazaro, and the Musaja brothers. The businesses provided the Harari people with safe public spaces to both socialize with the non-Muslims and benefit from their foreign goods and services. In 1846, Bishop Guglielmo Messiah established the Vicariate Apostolic of Gala. On April 22, 1881, a Catholic priest named Louis-Taurin Kahanya, and possibly one more Catholic missionary arrived in Harar, having traveled with a caravan of 2 French traders. They purchased property from an Egyptian officer that same year. Around April 1882, the German Baron J. von Muller traveled to Harar with his 20-year-old interpreter named Marcos Germe from the Swedish Evangelical Mission at Massawa. The Swedish missionary Anders Svensson also visited Harar in 1882. The missionaries opened churches in Harar. The existence of churches and missionaries gave the local Muslims the opportunity to learn about this religion from their perspective. There is a large difference between what Islam claims about Christianity and what Christians believe. Simple experiences of seeing and interacting with Christians could challenge any misconceptions one may have had about Christians or Christianity. The presence of free non-Muslims, Christian clergy, and the opening of churches could have allowed any existing crypto-Christians to slowly have the courage to practice their religion in public. Or, if these individuals did exist, they could have behaved like the crypto-Christians in Crete and continued to practice their faith in secret out of fear. The Vicariate Apostolic of Gala was renamed to the Vicariate Apostolic of Harar in 1937 and continues to exist in Harar. In 1885, after the Egyptian occupation, Harar was unstable. Emir Abdullahi was distrustful of the Christians living in Harar. He thought they were working for Menelik and supporting his plan of conquering Harar. In the year before, Menelik had sent Asme Girgis to Harar and pretended to be Muslim to collect information. The European traders became virtual prisoners in their homes and shops. The Oromo who lived nearby had also raided the town. To stabilize the city, the emir forced all foreigners and other negative influences to leave. By 1886, the emir had restricted the commercial activities of the few remaining Europeans in Harar. The emir introduced a new monetary system which impoverished the local population and caused the Somali and Oromo peoples to desert the markets in rebellion to the emir's actions. In 1887, after Menelik conquered Harar, the Harari people sent 2 Greeks and an Italian, who were imprisoned in the city, to Menelik's camp to ask for clemency for the population. They were well received and returned to Harar with the message that Menelik would act kindly and respect Islam. The settlement of Europeans in Harar also helped preserve the history of Harar. Richard Burton's First Footsteps in East Africa was published in 1856 and provided the first-hand account of the city from a non-Muslim European perspective. The book provides rare, detailed descriptions of the city's appearance, people, and history. In 1883, Arthur Rimbaud contributed to the documentation of images of Harar by taking the first photograph in the city. The photograph is of an artisan sitting on the floor surrounded by pottery and baskets. A few years later, Austrian ethnographer Dr. Philip Polichke took photographs of Harari soldiers and Emir Abdullahi. The image of the emir is the first and oldest image of an emir of Harar. The price of Harla people's tolerance of Muslims. The Harla kingdom existed as an independent, advanced, wealthy, and highly regarded civilization for 800 years. During this time, there is not a single battle or war started by the Harla people documented by any of the surrounding political entities, Christian, Muslim, or otherwise. The Harla people appear to have been peaceful people. It was only when they were conquered by the Ifat Sultanate that they started joining the Muslim sultanates in their wars against the Christian Empire. These wars would continue for more than 200 years. The Harla were well regarded by the Christian Empire in the mid-13th century, but by the 14th century the Harla had fallen to the Muslim sultanates and were joining their offensive wars. This is apparent by the earliest historical mention of the word Harla by the Ethiopian Empire. In the 14th century, Ethiopian Emperor Amda Sian recorded an attack by the Harla people who lived in modern-day Somaliland. The Harla had a tolerant culture. Unfortunately, they were tolerant of the intolerant ideology of Islam, which ultimately led to their erasure. In Islam, Islam is viewed as the only legitimate religion and Muslims are considered the best people. In Islamic scripture, non-Muslims are associated with negative traits such as evil, gluttony, and are even considered to be najis, filth, alongside feces, dogs, and pigs. Non-Muslims are condescendingly described as being misguided because they do as they wish instead of following Islam. Non-belief in Islam is described as a disease in their hearts. Thus, Islam describes non-Muslims as evil, dirty, lost, and abnormal. The opposite is true of Muslims who are taught that they are, or should be, moral, humble, clean, and enlightened. In Islam, the period of human history before Muhammad started preaching is even denigrated by the term Jahiliyyah, which means time of ignorance. For these reasons, it is clear how Muslim converts around Harar, such as the Harla people, would feel discouraged from preserving the non-Muslim history of their families or society to the next generations. Once a Muslim convert attributes their non-Muslim past with all the negative associations that Islam describes, they would feel ashamed. Such a past is one that would rather be hidden or denied than passed on to future generations. The erasure of the Harla people's non-Muslim legacy is apparent in what is known about them today. Most of what is known is from archaeological evidence discovered within the last 50 years. It is because of modern science and technology that we are able to uncover the legacy of this great civilization. Unfortunately, some parts of Harla history we may never learn. For example, the names of the non-Muslim Harla rulers and heroes, and any part of their society that was deemed forbidden in Islam. This includes certain styles of art, like images of living things, sculptures, dances, music, food, drinks, clothing, body art or piercings, games, celebrations, customs, myths, beliefs, laws, etc. If further research is performed in the future, More information may be uncovered about this great pre-Islamic civilization of the Horn of Africa. The price of Harari Muslims' intolerance of non-Muslims and Harari ex-Muslims. The Harari people's history of wars with Christians, invasions by the Oromo, and the occupation by the Egyptians tainted their perception of outsiders. As one would imagine, the Harari people strongly resisted the Egyptian occupation. They were afraid that Egyptian soldiers would rape the local girls, so they manufactured pants called gay ganafi to help prevent it. This style of pants are still worn by Harari women today, as it remains part of traditional Harari women's clothing. While the Harari did have understandable reasons for their xenophobic attitude, their failure to consider the potential benefits of free non-Muslims living in their city led to substantial losses. Centuries of isolation from free non-Muslims prevented the Harari people from the intellectual, social, economical, cultural, and spiritual benefits that are gained from living in a diverse society. Since the incorporation of Harar into the Ethiopian Empire, the Harari people were forced to open its walls to free non-Muslims and become citizens of a shared diverse nation. However, the Harari people have maintained a separate and distinct ethnic identity, apart from other citizens in the city. Today, the Harari people are generally proud citizens of Ethiopia. They contribute positively to the diverse country's culture, society, and progress. The Harari people live together with people of different ethnic groups and religions peacefully. The city is a popular location for tourists around the world. In stark contrast to the historical hostile attitude towards foreigners, the Harari people today treat foreigners with great care, respect, and hospitality. After the Ethiopians defeated the Italians in 1937, Haile Selassie made Sharia courts in Harar control only family matters, with the consent of the parties involved. This means there was no longer a death penalty for leaving Islam in Harar. In the absence of the threat of execution for leaving Islam, Harari people had more legal freedom to live as they chose. However, the preference for strict endogamy in the Harari community was an issue. In 1975, Sidney Waldron, an American anthropologist, reported if a Harari were to marry a Christian, they were talked about as if they were dead. Though a Harari person may or may not have left Islam to enter into a marriage with a Christian, the social rejection experienced by these individuals from their Harari families and community would have been difficult. The tendency of Muslims to disown or disassociate from friends or family who come out as ex-Muslim is directly from the Quran itself. O you who have believed, do not take your fathers or your brothers as allies if they have preferred disbelief over belief. And whoever does so among you, then it is those who are the wrongdoers. Similarly, Islamic scholars such as Sheikh Asim al-Hakim also recommend discommunication from loved ones who leave Islam. This Islamic command has led to many broken families and lost relationships. The cruel abandonment of loved ones because they left Islam can have a devastating effect on the mental health of both ex-Muslims and their Muslim families. Parents have abandoned children, children have abandoned parents, and spouses have ended their relationships. To prevent losing the love of one's family and friends, many ex-Muslims keep their apostasy a secret. After leaving Islam, ex-Muslims become non-religious or convert to another religion like Christianity. While it is difficult to find the history of ex-Muslim atheists in Ethiopia due to social and political factors, the history of ex-Muslim Christians is better documented. For example, in 2016, a 34-year-old Ethiopian mother of three named Habiba Ibrahim left Islam and converted to Christianity. When her husband found out, he locked her in the house and beat her with tree branches so severely that she had to be hospitalized. He was enraged and shouted at her, saying that she should die for leaving Islam. Currently in Somalia, Somali Christians and other non-Muslims are under severe persecution. Both the civilian population and members of al-Shabaab constantly harasses and executes anyone who is even suspected of leaving Islam. Sadly, many people in Somalia have been killed and continue to be killed simply because they don't believe in Islam. It is not documented how many Harari Christians there are. However, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church have operated in Harar for nearly 150 years. This means there could be Harari families who have been Catholic or Orthodox Christians for multiple generations. They could live in Ethiopia or the diaspora. Over the past several years, the Joshua Project, an evangelical Christian organization, has proselytized in Harar. Their missionary work includes videos and a translated movie about Jesus in the Harari language.
ولكن أخاي تجار جوايخو راها خو خزقين خلي بايتي
جنام زلغانة بيكروبل تجار نتو ياك إن شاء الله
أخاك خد سيكو زاكا جوايخو تبكى أخوة.
In addition, the Great Commission Ministry, GCM, has operated in Harar for over 20 years. They reported that the first few people who converted were severely persecuted. Their efforts to convert residents of the Harari region to Christianity were challenged by Muslim extremists and a traditional leader who imprisoned the missionaries for one day. The GCM claimed that their church has over 300 members and that the persecution of the Christian converts has since lessened. Conclusion. This video has demonstrated that the area in and around Harar was always home to people of diverse spiritual affiliations. The earliest record of people who developed and settled in the region are dated to the 6th century. This civilization predates the advent of Islam. They had their own indigenous spiritual beliefs and practices and were a highly advanced and wealthy civilization. Somaliland was home to Christians from as early as the 4th century, had large Christian communities in the 10th to 12th centuries, and a continued presence into the 13th century. In the 12th or 13th centuries, non-Muslim Somali people may have fled to the Harari region for freedom to practice their religion instead of converting to Islam. Muslim settlers in the region first lived under the rule of the local pagan leaders. The Muslims eventually established their own governments and then subjugated the Harla kingdom in the 13th century. However, non-Muslims continued to live freely in the Harari region into the 15th century. The Harla people's conversion to Islam was gradual. Some married into Muslim families, though their early conversion may have been superficial. The Harla people are said to have been defiant of Islamic law, refused to fast during Ramadan, and attempted to write the Quran in the Harla language. Indigenous people throughout Ethiopia have resisted pressures to convert to Christianity and Islam for centuries. In the 16th century, a wide spectrum of Muslims existed around Harar, from those who were very devout to those who were still somewhat connected to their pagan roots. The jihad, led by Imam Ahmad, mobilized religious zealots and consisted of the murder, forced conversion, extortion, and enslavement of thousands of non-Muslims who lived across Ethiopia. Many non-Muslim slaves were sent to other countries, but some were sent to Harar. The non-Muslim slaves in Harar worked to support families, businesses, and even became mothers to Harari children. Soon after the 16th century jihad, thousands of new Muslim converts moved to Harar and influenced the city's culture and politics. The former non-Muslim slave Amir Uthman even became a very successful ruler in Harar. These Muslim converts were indifferent to obeying Sharia law, which suggests they were either nominal Muslims or possibly crypto-pagans who converted to obtain the social status to live freely in Harar. The phenomenon of crypto-pagans and crypto-Christians is well documented around the world and may have existed in Harar due to its social hierarchy that favors Muslims. Islam was soon enforced onto the population through the building of numerous mosques, social monitoring of religious activities, and an Islamic school for children. This paved the path for a new indoctrinated population who would not be aware of any other way to live. Islam was taught to be an essential part of the Harari people's identity. While the original inhabitants of the region allowed the Muslims to settle on their land centuries prior, the Muslims now built a wall that prevented any free non-Muslim from settling in their city. The Muslims began to view themselves as civilized and superior inside their newly formed wall. Those outside were seen as uncivilized and inferior. Foreigners who wanted to be accepted as a citizen of the city had to assimilate through a process that included learning Islam. The inclusion of Islam as a criteria for the historical concept of the Harari identity marginalizes the non-Muslims who have always lived in the region and denies people's right to freedom of and from religion. Because of directives in the Quran, the Harari people are encouraged to shun those who leave Islam. Sadly, many ex-Muslims around the world continue to suffer psychological and physical abuse from their Muslim families and communities because they left Islam. Harari Christians and other non-Muslims are vulnerable to this marginalization and persecution within the Harari Muslim community. The xenophobia the Harari people developed was confronted in 1875 with the Egyptian occupation. While the Harari people resisted the occupation and feared the prosperity of their city was at risk, they in fact benefited from being exposed to the Europeans' cultures, ways of life, foreign goods and services, religious perspectives, and peacekeeping communications. The Harari people's intolerance and centuries of isolation thus led to intellectual, social, economical, cultural, and spiritual losses. In contrast, the tolerance of the Harla people towards Muslims and the totalitarian nature of Islam contributed to their erasure. Their long non-Islamic history is mostly lost and may never be retrieved. Therefore, non-Muslim populations were the original inhabitants of settlements around Harar. While Harar was established with an Islamic government, various non-Muslim groups have lived and contributed to the city for the entire duration of its history, either as slaves, free people, and possibly crypto-Christians and crypto-pagans. Today, Harar is home to both Muslims and non-Muslims who live together peacefully as equal citizens of Ethiopia.